Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Modern Market. This is our daily show from Monday to Friday, 7 a.m. Eastern Time, 12 p.m. BST. Every day of the week, where we discuss all things to do with the modern market. That is the crypto market, the NFT market, and the ETH ETF market. It is ETH ETF day. We're going to get into all of the details about that and a lot more, as usual. But just before we do that, just a reminder, friends, that nothing that we say here is financial advice. This modern market is exceptionally risky and we do not know anything for sure, unfortunately. So please do proceed with caution and exercise your own judgment. With that out of the way, legendary, it is Tuesday. It is the 23rd of July. It is ETH ETF day. Happy ETH ETF day. Is that something that we need to say on this day today?
I think so. I've been waiting for this day for quite a while. Ever since I bought my first ETH at $11, which is 8 years ago. Yeah, 8 years ago. So been waiting almost a decade for that day. So
I mean,
definitely happy ETH ETF day.
I actually saw there's a few birthdays recently in the space. I saw a tweet by Lucas saying it was Pudgy Penguin's third birthday, literally 2 days ago or one day ago. And
Mm.
literally 1 day or 2 days ago, ETH was also 10 years old, I believe, if that should be correct. So yeah, a lot of birthdays. So you bought your first Ether at $11. Did you buy
Yep.
1, 2, 10,000? How many did you manage to get at that price? Do you remember?
I remember because they're still untouched in that very wallet.
Because you lost the keys, right?
I lost the keys. I found the keys again. I managed to brute force access back into that wallet. And
Ooh,
it's not a lot to given the fact how young I was back then and how little money I had. But just put in like $200 or €200 into that, so like $220. So it's basically in the 20-ish ETH range. I'm not going to say the exact figure because otherwise you can like find that pretty easily, that wallet.
interesting. That's pretty fun. So you just put some pocket change into ETH back in the
You know what
day.
the thinking back then was?
What?
Can't afford a whole Bitcoin. Bitcoin's too expensive. What's the next best thing? ETH? No idea what it does, but I'm sold. Let's do it. Let's take it.
And now I guess that's still the thinking for loads of people for different reasons. Oh, you can't afford a whole Bitcoin. ETH is also too expensive. Why not buy Solana, right? As soon as things become too expensive, why not just move down the curve?
Unit bias definitely is a thing, yeah.
Interesting. Interesting stuff. So look, it is ETH ETF day. That is the main thing on the news today. So we're going to discuss that in a reasonable amount of detail as we get into the show. But as usual, we've got a few interesting things to get to before that. So let's start with the main headlines from the snapshot, which is pinned up top as always, to get you up to speed with everything that's happened in the past 24 hours. Let's start with some price action. Actually, let's just refresh here. I'm showing it on the screen for people who are watching in. We're live on X. We're live on YouTube as well. So Bitcoin is down 1% at 66.7K. ETH is pretty much flat, actually, going into today at 3.5K. And Solana down almost 2% at $176. But as you can see, across this last 7 days, Solana's been really moving up 13%. ETH is just up 2% in that same period of time, whereas Bitcoin's actually up 5% in that period of time as well. So once again, ETH is underperforming compared to the others, at least in this kind of short period of time as we go into the ETH ETF day. Getting into the headlines, number one, as I said, ETH ETF day, Coinbase is powering 8 of the 9 newly approved ETH ETFs. So Brian Armstrong said, another huge step forward for regulatory clarity. ETH is not a security. We've been saying it for years. And today the SEC finally made it official. Coinbase is proud to be the trusted partner and custodian powering 8 of the 9 newly approved ETH ETFs. Definitely want to reflect on Coinbase's role in this just for a period of time. I'm sure many people will skip over that, but yeah, their fingerprints are all over these ETFs, and want to discuss some of the thoughts there. Number two, Jupiter announces cat coin experiment with Irene Zhao, which gets community noted for her alleged previous involvement with scams. Obviously, Jupiter is the biggest DEX on Solana. Definitely thought this was worth a headline today, trying to release this kind of protocol to launch meme coins. But they partnered up with Irene, who came under a lot of criticism for some of her previous activity, which some people alleged were scams, and the community, and she got community noted. Or Jupiter got community noted for that announcement. And finally, very interesting as well, Mochaverse announced partnership and token swap with the Ton Foundation. The steering committee will mobilize Ton and Mocha from the token swap agreement, valued at a combined total of 20 million US dollars, to facilitate cross-user pollination and drive user growth via point fi system and onboarding apps to the Ton ecosystem. I think this is really, really interesting. I was hanging out with the Animoca tokenomics team last week. The head of the tokenomics came to our London meetup, and then I was actually around their offices the day after as well. And I thought this was, they mentioned something to do with this. They didn't mention the Ton partnership, but this idea of token swapping between DAOs is pretty interesting. So I want to delve into the details there to explain what's going on, because I see a lot of prominent members of DAOs in the audience as well. So I'm sure people will be intrigued as to how that is exactly operating. A few notable sales from around the space: CryptoPunk Clown Eyes Blue selling for 37 ETH. Miladies are on the rise, I believe. We'll talk about that in a second. And Doodles Rainbow Puke selling for 5.5 ETH. I think that's a pretty cool one for sure. Legendary, those are the headlines. That is the price action. Before we get into the main headlines and the discussion point for today, what is catching your attention in the market?
Absolutely. If we move over to Mintify, our NFT trading platform and marketplace partner, it's actually, apart from what you already had mentioned with Remilios, which are up 5% to a 1.71 ETH floor, it's actually a pretty flat day. There's not a lot going on in ETH NFT land. We have Apes flat at 9.3 ETH. We have Pudgies up 1%, 10.6 ETH floor. Azuki's down 0.5% at the 4 ETH floor. So not a lot of movement. Feels like we're waiting to see what the ETH ETF is doing, what the price action on that will do, and then we'll determine which way we're going to go. However, one observation is the V1 CryptoPunks, not because they had like such a massive movement in price, but more interestingly, over the last 3 days, they've actually seen quite a fair bit of volume. Currently sitting at a 1.5 ETH floor, but over the last 24 hours alone, 18 ETH in volume, with basically a handful of wallets buying them. And again, over the last 3 days, we've definitely seen an increased sales activity on the punks, whereas before that, the activity was significantly lower. So seems to be a bit of an uptick there in volume, but not in price, not in floor price.
Interesting.
You know, I like the V1 punks quite a lot. Like I always,
yeah, I know you've got a soft spot for these for sure.
Yeah.
I wanted to bring up the Miladies because they are once again up, not by a huge amount, but they're at 5.57 ETH. I don't know if you saw this tweet by Beanie or seen it on Polymarket, but apparently there is a bet available on Polymarket that Miladies will flip Bored Apes.
I spoke to that yesterday while you were
What did you say?
cuffing on after the roundup and had like a 1-2 minute break from the show. I think the bet yesterday was at a 47% for the Miladies to flip the apes at the end of the year.
Okay.
As much as I love betting on Polymarket, I feel like at the current odds, let's see if they changed. They are currently at a 46% chance. So they had a massive pump yesterday all the way to 70 cents, but dumped again to 46% chance to flip that. At the current odds, where ladies are essentially a bit more than half of a Bored Apes floor price, and odds are a bit below that, yes, it would be more profitable to bet on the Miladies on Polymarket versus straight out buying one. On the other hand, if you'd factor in airdrops and other potential benefits, you might still want to have a Milady. Other argument in favor of going on Polymarket again would be you just can have a lower bet, a smaller bet. However, the same caveat applies that I also shared yesterday. The bet size, the bet volume on that is a very small one. It is just a tiny, tiny 11K bet. So actually significantly less than the price of a single Milady.
Right. So for people trying to synthesize that from your perspective, because I know you've been speaking about it the last few days, if you wanted to bet on one of these types of bets, like token going above $1 billion market cap, or this NFT flipping that NFT, how would you think about deciding which bet is the better place to place the bet? Do you buy the Milady at 5.5 ETH, even though that's, pretty expensive? But if you had 5.5 ETH, say you had 5.5 ETH, you had enough to buy the Milady, or you had the 5.5 ETH to make the bet. I guess it just depends on what the percentage is, right? Is that what you would be thinking, or is there anything else in terms of
Yeah,
thinking?
there's more to think about. One thing is the percentage. Other thing is like potential other rewards. However, in this very specific context, I'm going to share my screen real quick on that specific bet because there's only 11K in that. And if you take a look at the order book, which I'm currently sharing on screen, you can see that the yes-no spread is quite immense. So if you take a bet on yes, actually the price for that is 99 cents, can only go up to $1. You can do a 5 or a 4.9K bet, whereas the spread on the nose is just a 54 cent. So because the order book doesn't look like really filled because it's such a small bet, you would have almost zero upside right now betting on a yes, because there's been like this little pump and basically eliminated parts of the order book. So right now there's no way why I would bet on Polymarket on that. But generally speaking, with obviously the larger bets where that is not a concern, then it really comes like the PopCat bet one that I did on Polymarket. And it comes to the question, what is your hypothesis? Will Milady's flip Bored Apes, and that's the end of the story? Then obviously you want to maximize, along the way to flipping that, because you can also like cancel that bet early and take more profits, right? On the other hand, if your thinking is, Milady's are going to 20 ETH, then obviously you want to have the uncapped upside. Similarly with the question PopCat to 1B, or if you think PopCat goes to 5B, then obviously you want to have a spot buy of that. And then the third consideration becomes what I teased before. What are potential other benefits? Do you think you can get a specific airdrop? Cult was a thing, a specific airdrop for another project by holding a Milady, which would make it more enticing to, bet on that. If you think there's no such airdrop to be had with a specific bet, and you might be in the camp to think Polymarket could do an airdrop for the volume that you do there, then you would rather want to take your bet there. So there's more additional factors than just like the potential upside of your bet to consider. But I think one of the things that people probably forget sometimes is with smaller bets that actually the bid-ask spread matters, especially if you want to come in with a larger bet. Like, again, if you said you had the 5 ETH, that's more than the entire betting market on that. You couldn't even place a 15K bet on that right now.
Got it. Look, I think that's a really, really helpful little breakdown to some of the considerations, because increasingly we are definitely seeing Polymarket kind of put across our screens and put across our attention, and people want to figure out like maybe some of these NFT or crypto based bets. I want to participate over there, and just having that as a way to, as a, not a formula, but a process of helping you kind of think about how you might participate, I think is quite helpful. So, speaking of airdrops, though, we are going to do this week's segment today, which is brought to you by Pump Markets. We want to be always trying to consider what type of airdrops are around the corner, how we might be allocating our capital. So I am going to do this week's segment, which will be focused on a protocol called Symbiotic. So Symbiotic restaking vaults have been filled with $1.27 billion versus Eigenlayer at $16.7 billion versus Karak at $0.7 billion. So what I'm about to share is why I would be shifting my capital to Symbiotic. And this is with thanks to our segment sponsor. This is brought to you by Pump Markets, the ultimate protocol for trading your airdrop points and pre-TGE tokens. So the context here, and this context is very important, Eigenlayer is currently the main restaking protocol and has already dropped their first round of community rewards with its pre-market token price at $5, putting it at an $8 billion FDV. Even if the pre-market price is overpriced, which they have been so far this cycle, this is still a significant amount of value dropped to its users. Therefore, restaking is still a valuable narrative to follow. So why would I switch to Symbiotic? I've got 3 reasons. Number 1, the first drop is always the best drop. Eigenlayer has done its first drop. It was good for users, but this cycle, it feels like second drops are underwhelming versus first drops. So Symbiotic's potential first drop could be better relative to Eigenlayer's second. Number 2, Symbiotic is backed by Lido and Paradigm. Usually leaders lead, and I wouldn't swap away from Eigenlayer because of its dominant position. But Lido, who created Staked ETH, and Paradigm, who back many of the most promising projects, are forces in crypto. And finally, Symbiotic TVL will rise fast. At the moment, people might not know this, the vaults are capped and it's not possible to add more ETH whenever you want. I imagine this means that TVL will rise fast as and when caps are increased. A higher TVL should lead to an increased price for its potential token. At a minimum, it's a way for you to lock up your ETH and earn yield on it so you don't do anything stupid with it. But of course, be aware of all restaking risks by reading their documents. So those are my 3 reasons for Symbiotic, with thanks again to our segment sponsor, Pump Markets, who have 9 pre-markets live and are expanding across different EVM chains. Legendary, curious to hear your thoughts. We've both been participating in restaking stuff in general. What's your thinking here? What are your thoughts on Symbiotic? Yeah, where are you at with it?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, if we take a step back and look at something like ETHify as a restaking manager, we said ETHify airdrop did quite well because it was the first of its kind. And then we kind of shifted to be less bullish on the others. I think, however, with Symbiotic, and then I'd be curious to hear from you on that, I probably have a different view on that because it has the Lido backing. And I don't care about the Paradigm side too much of it. I care about the Lido backing more, just given the
Why
fact.
do you think that's so important then?
Because 28% of ETH is currently staked. Majority of a significant part of that is being staked with Lido. And if they themselves would have the incentive to restake a good amount of their own staked stack or incentivize their users to do so, then they would be able to tap into potential like capital, asset under management, TVL, however you want to call that flow, that Eigenlayer just quote unquote like had to build up organically, and Lido is able to tap into like a massive pool of capital, and would be one of the few protocols who kind of would have a second mover advantage, which I typically think is not the biggest thing in crypto necessarily, because we tend to reward the first movers because trust is such a big thing. You just tend to trust the institutions in crypto that have been along for the longest time. But I feel like that Symbiotic with Lido is in a very specific situation because they have access, quote unquote, access to a huge amount of staked ETH that potentially could be restaked.
Yeah. So this is my thinking. So that's exactly my second point, which was, usually you just follow the leader in this space. That definitely happened with the LRTs like ETHify, for example, right? ETHify got ahead in this restaking game. And remember, ETHify is one of the avenues that like you can park your ETH with them and they'll restake it for you into Eigenlayer. So it's kind of a double play, actually. You get an ETHify exposure to their token and you get the Eigenlayer exposure at the same time. But there were multiple protocols that were essentially doing the same thing. And ETHify by far in a way became the winner in that scenario. But even with that was so successful, the second time round, they just weren't able to offer the same types of rewards that they did the first time round. Maybe that's tactical, to be honest. I think the token is still doing pretty well. When I last checked, even after the second round of rewards, the token was still trading at a $2-something billion FDV, which is very, very impressive, all things considered. Now, obviously, at one point in time, it had gone up to $6 to $7 billion FDV, so it's much lower than that, but still doing not at all bad. Legendary, I can see you just sharing the screen here. Damn, up to 2.6. So just so people know, we're showing the price action for ETHify on the screen. Typically, when airdrops happen, everything dumps, right? And maybe it did dump a little bit in advance, but when the airdrop came out, the price was at 2.3. So that's pretty bullish for this particular token, I think, because there's clearly been some appreciation since that time, despite obviously a certain amount of selling there. So any further thoughts on that, Legendary? What are your thoughts, whether it's to do with ETHify or restaking in general?
Yeah, if anything, I'm wondering if this like 17% move would be something that's consistent around other things, say like Arbitrum over the last 7 days. Yeah, also up 10%. Let's see if
Search
Optimism.
for ENS. Because I think one of the things that all of these protocols are moving with is like they're kind of ETH beta. So
Exactly. And my thinking was to see, yeah, ENS is up 12% over the last 7 days. Optimism probably will show a similar chart as well. If this is a bit of a beta play, yeah, up 10% optimism on the ETH ETFs.
Yeah. Okay. So, as you say, these things kind of move in unison sometimes. So important to point that out. Maybe my final helpful point for people, a little bit of interesting information or helpful information if you're not so familiar. Again, the way to access this, as I said, you can't access it really until the vault's open. And then every now and again, they'll put a tweet out and they'll say the vaults are open. And then like 17 minutes later, the vaults are closed because they've been filled up. So that's not helpful for you to start earning your Symbiotic points, right? Because you just can't get it if you're waiting. On EtherFi, however, and then I didn't write that in my tweet. So this is purely for the listeners. On EtherFi, there's an option for you to park your ETH with them so that they put it in on your behalf when the vaults open. And so the first time I went into Symbiotic, I just did it like that because I missed the vaults because they went open and they closed before I had even realized. And then second time I saw that option, I was like, okay, let me park it with you guys. And then I think on their Discord, they had an announcement to say, oh, if you parked it with us, we've like put it in for you. It's like, oh, great. That's such a good functionality. So that's what I did in order to get into Symbiotic. I would love to. I kind of just want to go into the protocol myself next time because I want to like test it out and like use the website. But if that becomes too difficult, I'm just going to go via EtherFi again, probably. So look, I hope that's helpful. We always try to do these check-ins with like thoughts on how we're allocating capital to different places. Obviously, Symbiotic will be expected to do a token at some point as well. Nothing is guaranteed in this space, but that's the line of thinking that a lot of people are going down. So hopefully by doing this, you might get some exposure to that. So that is that. Let's get into the main headlines for today. Legendary, it is ETH ETF day. As we said, just going to set us up with a few bits of factual information before we get into a bigger discussion on this. So yesterday, ETH ETFs were approved. Well, not yesterday. The ETH ETFs were approved by the SEC, bringing popular funds to second largest cryptocurrency. This is from CoinDesk. US regulators have given final approval for spot exchange traded funds that hold Ether, giving Americans access to a second major cryptocurrency via the easy to trade vehicles. The decision caps a years-long process to get Ether ETFs approved by the SEC and follows the regulator's approval of Bitcoin ETFs in January. Packaging Ether in an ETF wrapper could make them more palatable to conventional investors. This is the thinking anyway, since the funds can be bought and sold through traditional brokerage accounts. Since their debut in January, Bitcoin ETFs have attracted tens of billions of dollars of investment. Obviously, a little bit of further context. This was not foreseen not more than a month ago or back in May. A lot of senior analysts thought that it wasn't going to happen, and then in a big surprise turn of events, it did. Chief at the investment office of Bitwise said this: "We've now fully entered the ETF era of crypto. Investors can now access more than 70% of the liquid crypto asset market through low-cost ETPs." So that's the kind of headline stuff. The ETH ETF is here. Obviously, now people will want to take the discussion towards what's going to happen. Are we going to go up? Are we going to go down? How long will this take to go up or down? And also, I guess because the Bitcoin ETF has already gone live, I guess the question is, to what extent do we track that? Do we operate in the same way? Do we attract a certain percentage flow? So if Bitcoin gets X amount per day moving forward or in total over the year, is ETH going to get 20%, 30%? People are thinking in those terms. But Legendary, just want to throw to you here, is there any important information that I've missed, first off? And second, how else are you thinking about this ETF approval?
Yeah, trading starts in exactly 2 hours, 9:30 a.m. Eastern time. Going to be tradable on the New York Stock Exchange, Nasdaq, CBOE. And I think you have set up a post to discuss that's a bit more complex on that, but I want to bring up something different first, which I think is helpful. And it's actually the BlackRock, the iShares page that's basically explaining what's ETH, what's the use case, and I found it quite interesting
That's
to
good.
kind of
That
view
looks
it.
like a good page. Is
Explain.
this a BlackRock page? Bullish
Yeah,
on this page.
bullish page, nice colors, nice blue. What I found interesting is how they explain the difference between ETH and BTC, and then what's the investment case for ETH, and that's something I want to dive
Ooh.
a bit into. So basically, BlackRock iShares is explaining Bitcoin is the world's largest cryptocurrency and the first form of internet native money to gain broad global adoption. Ethereum is the second largest cryptocurrency by market cap and a flexible technology platform supporting applications or programs that can run without a centralized intermediary, which is a bit complex. However, in the paragraph, what is the investment case for ETH? Actually, the second part of that explanation is quite an interesting one. They're saying when applications are built on Ethereum, it's Ether tokens that function as the money required to transact in the Ethereum ecosystem. This Ether, when spent on transaction fees, is destroyed and removed from circulation, potentially reducing the supply of Ether as a platform as usage grows. As such, investing in Ether, and that's the key sentence, is expressing a view that more applications will be built on Ethereum's open and permissionless programming infrastructure, with the idea of attracting more users, more revenue, and expanding the universe in which Ether is utilized as money. So that breakdown, it's something that Eric Balkunas from Bloomberg also has pointed out, because this goes on to answer more questions. How can I invest in ETH? Yada, yada, yada. Is very boomer friendly in a good way. It's very TradFi friendly. And the other analogy that they're using is an open source app store that
Mhm.
ETH basically constitutes with a tech platform. And having that breakdown and coming in like as a TradFi person, as a retail investor even, and having that explanation, okay, there's Bitcoin, this is BTC, this is what I'm betting on with ETH in like understandable terms, combined with the fact that with the mini ETH trust by Grayscale, that potentially could be cheaper than one Big Mac. Basically, having again going back to the unit bias that we had at the start of the show, right? I can't afford one ETH, I can't afford one BTC, but I can afford to put $4 or $5 into one quote unquote ETH share from that specific ETF that I'm buying, makes for quite an interesting setup. And I think, you can laugh about this explanation and call it like super simple or whatever, but I think that's a highly significant page. And obviously, it's not only BlackRock with iShares doing that, but every ETF provider has something similar.
Mm.
Um, but like directly catered to people who are not crypto natives is a very significant one. I'm gonna pause there for a second to hear your thoughts on
Yes,
that.
please. Thanks. So I do want you to go into the grayscale stuff in a bit because there's some details going on there which I think would be helpful to bring to people's attention. But to your point about the way it's being marketed, we did a little segment on it last time, right? When we were talking about ETH ETFs and we looked at the Vanek paper that they had written. And I would just, I would be pretty confident that we are misunderstood, that we are, how would put this? We we are underappreciating the like TradFi's ability to A, understand what ETH is, and B, the kind of TradFi's ability to consider it to be bullish or consider it to be a good thing. Because the way that it was written in the Vanek paper when we read it and we did that on the show, it was fantastic. Like, to be honest, like it was really, really good. It was trying to actually communicate that ETH is not just one thing. So like, let's put that idea out of your head. It's not just money. It's not just digital oil. It's not just any of these things. It's kind of a mixture of it has qualities that might be, it has the qualities of a variety of things, but they explained all of those things fantastically well. So I think like crypto Twitter, native crypto Twitter is underappreciating how well people have explained it and how people might be able to receive it. I think that I'm pretty confident on that from my perspective. Just a quick thought from you, Legendary, then happy for you to just take us into the grayscale stuff.
Yeah, absolutely agree. I think even digital oil might be a bit difficult to comprehend. I mean, obviously, we have a good idea where we need oil, what crude oil is used in, but not to the extent of the whole like plastics industry, et cetera, et cetera. And the open app store analogy, and Vanek used it as well.
Yeah.
It's just the simplest one. You know, okay, Apple's App Store, Play Store on Android, make a shit ton of money. There's developers have apps on there. Users spend money on those apps or games, and the app stores take a fee. And this is a decentralized app store built obviously on the Ethereum tech stack. And that's basically the bet there, that they are able to build a successful framework for a decentralized app store.
Yeah. I mean, this is my point. They explained all of those potential options very, very well. So let's keep it moving. Get into the grayscale stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. We have a bit of a long post by Evan SS6, quite prominent trader. And I'm going to go to parts of it. I'm going to try to simplify it a bit because it's a bit complex in its explanation, but I think the key findings are quite relevant. And Evan's thoughts are, we are still in fairly low volume summer with spot ETF trading in the low to mid 9 figures day range on the spot markets on Coinbase, meaning because there's low trading volume, every bit of inflow that we see is actually more impactful versus if we would be in the busy season. So 50 to 100 mil net one way could actually have an impact on the price. And then this is the bit, the more complex part. Evan goes into explaining basically the difference between the launch of the Bitcoin ETF, especially under the light of the grayscale situation with the Bitcoin Trust and now the ETH Trust, and how similar the situation is now with ETH. And it's actually quite different for a couple of reasons. Again, I'm not going to read through all of this because it's a bit too complex, but the key finding is Bitcoin does not have that mini trust yet. ETH already has it. With Bitcoin, you didn't have a lot of time to switch over capital. With ETH, we actually saw a 2-month delay that already allowed for capital to flow. And there's like not a lot, there's not the same situation or not the same setup that we had with Bitcoin, where
lots of
where
GBTC was
yeah,
being sold, right?
exactly, where basically you had lots of GBTC being sold in the first 2 weeks, basically leading to aggressive outflows from Grayscale, still modest net inflows, but almost annihilated the net inflows. And that's not the same situation here, because we don't expect that similar level of outflows with ETH. And again, anyone who was eager to get out, this is one of the key points, had 2 months time to do so versus a couple of days time for BTC. And then the last point that Evan is touching on in this post is the flows predictions, which is something that we also spoke about. Basically, how high will the inflows be, relatively speaking, to the Bitcoin ETF inflows? And I think those predictions have been all over the range, from the more bullish ones putting it in the 20 plus percent range. The Bloomberg boys having a 10% relative flow versus BTC, and some of the native whales where Evan isn't really quoting who he's meaning by that, seeing net inflows from 0 to 7%. I think we spoke about a post by Andrew Kang a couple of weeks ago who actually said ETH ETF will be a net negative for ETH, and went on to explain his thoughts on that. Again, something I disagree on with, but we are definitely all over the range with those predictions.
I mean, I definitely agree with that. Thanks for the explanation about the grayscale stuff. I think that was helpful. But when it comes to trying to determine the percentage inflows as they relate to the Bitcoin ones, yeah, like I can't establish any kind of consensus. I don't think. I think people are kind of all over the place. Even I like how you referred to them as the Bloomberg boys. Is that what you said? The
Yeah.
Bloomberg boys?
Yeah.
Yeah, the Bloomberg boys, I think, have actually revised it since they started at one particular number and then have kind of been walked up a little bit after. I think it's very, very hard to predict, obviously. But I think people are really feeling that with this issue in particular. One thing I would point out, I don't know if we want to, one thing I'd want to point out is this account, which Evan, I don't know if this is alpha or like something for people to keep an eye on, but there's this account that Evan mentions, BLWONX. And obviously I'm online all the time, and like I pay very close attention to who's tagging who and who's commenting on who and whatever. This account was made in May 2024 and has already got 3,700 followers. It's got 0 people following. It's followed by like some quite prominent people, and writes in a very like authoritative way of what they think is going to happen on, about the ETF, and seems to be getting great engagement. Unfortunately, now with the Elon changes to X, we can't like check whether the engagement is proper, but seems to be getting referenced by quite a few people, or that's something I've just been alive to recently. I have no idea who this account is, but I
You know
feel
who this
like,
account is?
huh?
Do you want to know who this account is? Because
What?
you asked me before the show, and this is the first time I heard about them, but I did a little 5-minute research, to take that with a
Oh
grain
yeah,
of salt. But the name reads BLW on X,
yeah.
and there is a quite prominent YouTube channel, which is BLW Online Trading.
Nah,
170K followers, does options trading, binary options, also cryptocurrency.
no way,
Initial
man.
hypothesis was that this could be this guy, but I don't know.
No way. The reason why it would be no way to me is because crypto Twitter is so against YouTube crypto YouTube, that I don't know that like any native whales or like some of these traders that I can see that's following the BWL account, I can't see how those people would be taking seriously if it was like a kind of YouTube style crypto account. That's my instinct. I absolutely do not know for sure. But I'm very intrigued. Maybe this is kind of a side topic, but I don't know. I'm just putting it out there as an account to keep an eye on, just so people know what they're saying, because they've been referenced by a few other people. They've been saying things like, I might share my screen at the same time. Day one of launch is expected to be volatile. The true colors will be expressed within a week, and setting the tone for the first month. Upon effectiveness of the registration statement, investors will begin to receive prospectus materials, which starts the full marketing cycle. Given the overwhelming success of BTC ETFs, ETH commitment targets will be raised, and there is no reason these targets are not met. Prospective investors will see the success of Bitcoin, the impending tailwinds in regulatory and political policies, and understand this is a risk-reduced opportunity to invest in emerging digital assets, a bundle that now includes both BTC and ETH. Legendary, I don't know if we can predict, or if we want to predict perfectly what is going to happen. Sometimes when I'm fairly confused and don't know precisely, I try to pick out like specific bits of people's thesis, which I believe to be true, and then like try to work from there. I've got a couple of ideas for that, but I just want to go to you to try to figure out, like, is there bits of these people's thesis that you like? Is there one particular bit in particular? What's your thought?
What's my thought on that? So first of all, I also don't feel comfortable like to predict any kind of
Sure.
specific inflow
Yeah.
of that. But the prospective investors will see the success of BTC impending tailwinds in regulatory and political policies, and understand this is a risk-reduced opportunity to invest in emerging digital assets. A bundle that now includes both BTC and ETH is a pretty factual like statement. There's not a lot of room to argue with that. But maybe abstracting away from that and going to like the broader statements that we've seen in terms of the inflows, I think the most extreme negative case that I just mentioned before was Andrew Kang's point, saying that no way this is a net positive. And then, which we just spoke about with Evan, that we see low spot volume right now, relatively low. But what we also see, it's a point I made a couple of times on the show, a fair amount of ETH being staked, close to all-time high being staked, more than 10% being locked up in smart contracts. I feel, to me, this is a bullish setup, if not all of the ETH is free floating, and a lot of it, 40% of it, is happily chilling in a staked form or in a smart contract. Plus, there's not a lot of spot volume. That should be more interesting in terms of a positive price action if we get some nice net inflows, which I hope we will do.
Sure.
But I also guess it's, it's 1 hour and 44 minutes before we will start seeing what that actually means and how the first couple of minutes, hours will look like. So a bit late to speculate on potential inflows in a precise numbers way.
Yeah. I think there's two things that I would pick out, which I like the sound of, or that I'm maybe persuaded by, especially when there's like loads of writing. Trying to pick out the key bits, I think, is maybe important when you're trying to think through things. One maybe on the short term basis, one on the medium to longer term. I like the idea. I hadn't thought of the idea that, okay, well, we're in a low trading environment, like we're still in the summer, and therefore I think Evan was suggesting that, okay, well, we're still in the summer, it's a low trading environment, therefore 50 to 100 million net one way or the other could be a lot here and get accentuated by derivatives because of us being in like this kind of quieter period. So that's something to keep an eye out for. And then the second thing, which the other tweet was suggesting, is about like this bundle idea, like this stuff's just getting bundled up. A bundle that now includes both Bitcoin and ETH. And there was a tweet by Nate, I can't remember his surname. Is it Garachi or something like that? The other day, talking about how we're probably moving into a world where you'll have bigger bundles of stuff. So you'll have Bitcoin, Sol, ETH, and Sol, and maybe different types of bundles being created for different other types of assets. And so I feel like that could be something that will definitely happen at some point. And frankly, if Solana keeps going the way that it's going, and we know Van Eck have already applied for the Solana ETF, whether that actually gets through practically or whether that has to wait a very long time for a while, you can see how that plays out in the medium to long term, where you just want to dump some money into an ETF and have it be spread across the variety of assets which are in there. So those are the things which make sense to me in terms of the short term price action. I think it's quite difficult to say, but I think that is fair. Any final reflections on this, Legendary? Because I think we're done with it, and then we'll get on to one of the other interesting bits of news I want to dive into.
Nothing to add. Very happy to move on to the next bit.
Awesome. I want to get into this Mochaverse Telegram integration, but before we do that, let's hit the Web3 Roundup to get up to speed with everything else that has been happening in the space to get you up to speed from the past 24 hours. Number one, BlackRock BTC ETF inflows yesterday hit $523 million. I saw a tweet by Ovi who suggested that, damn, that was pretty high, but the price hasn't really moved that much. So either there was a lot of selling, or maybe there's people adding to the basis trade. I don't know. Number two, Echo co-investing platform by Kobe comes out of beta. Always nice to keep an eye on that to try to democratize angel investing. Next, MPC Labs announces a $21 million raise by Pantera, prominent investing firm. Next, Liquidium airdrops $11 million to users of the platform, opening at $37 million market cap, but drops to $30 million. If you use Liquidium, it was like an NFT ordinals lending platform on Bitcoin. Check your wallets. I got a little bit of Liquidium. I think it was like $300 worth, which is not bad. Next, Boldinals by Bold mint out for 0.01 Bitcoin and trade for 25x at 0.25 Bitcoin. Pretty outstanding. Bold Leonidas absolutely crushing it on the daily with his kind of comic strip art style. Next, Hyperlend announces as first lending platform on Hyperliquid. I want to play around on that personally. I'm not doing enough stuff on Hyperliquid, although I mentioned yesterday or the day before, dumped a bunch of dollars into the vault quite a long time ago, earning a nice interest. And finally, Base announces any US politician can begin to accept political donations on Base. That would be interesting from the perspective of like the radical transparency that blockchains might be able to provide, and seeing where party funds go. I don't know if that's something people would be willing to be completely transparent at the beginning, but maybe at some point in time, that could be something people aspire towards. Look, let's get into the final headline for today. I don't know if we're going to dwell on the cat coin saga coming out of Jupiter, but this piece from Animoca Brands was a pretty interesting announcement. So I'll just touch on it and then we'll get into the official PR release. They said, we're excited to announce our strategic partnership with the Ton blockchain to grow the interoperable consumer network. Together, we are driving true consumer crypto adoption. So there's going to be a strategic alignment. Mochaverse, the Mocha Foundation, and the Ton Foundation will establish a steering committee to drive partnership initiatives and treasury for ecosystem growth. The steering committee will mobilize Ton, the Ton token, and the Mocha token from the token swap agreement, valued at a combined total of $20 million, to facilitate cross-user pollination and drive user growth via point five system and onboarding apps to the Ton ecosystem. Just try to get into what that more precisely means. Actually, I'll stop there first, Legendary, just to get your initial thoughts. I wanted to pick this out because it seems pretty interesting that two foundations are thinking about swapping their tokens and thinking about how they can work with each other, given that there are so many DAOs now, right? So many protocols have come to market. So many protocols have huge amounts of funds in their native tokens sitting in their wallets, thinking of how to distribute thoughtfully to either their community, contributors, or whatever. Like, what do you think about this initiative to try to partner up almost with another huge protocol and, just figure out how you can stimulate the economies?
Look, I think it's a cool announcement. I think there are a lot of buzzwords in. If you can reshare the screen real quick because I want to reference something.
Sure.
I think there are a lot of buzzwords in there with the cross-user pollination, yada yada yada.
Yeah.
If we break that down to what it actually means, you have 20 mil, the combined total value of the swap agreement, which basically, you said it beautifully, drive user growth via point five system and onboarding apps to the Ton ecosystem means the Ton can give out Mocha tokens. Probably Mochaverse can give out Ton tokens to create like an onboarding marketing campaign. That's all nice and good, and definitely increases like the theoretically the number of theoretically addressable users. However, to me, the most relevant thing of that is actually hidden in the last paragraph, in the last two sentences, which is the reputation layer part. This partnership will facilitate the adoption of Realm SDK, a central source of user reputations across ecosystem apps on Ton blockchain. Because we've been speaking about this idea, how Mochaverse is building that reputation layer, that loyalty program, and that's actually like the key asset. And if Tiro, who has crowned himself the Hamster Combat CEO in the YouTube comments, can suddenly track his activity on Telegram and have that loyalty point score, which is being served via Mochaverse, that's actually a very significant thing. That's, to me, the more important part of that partnership than the token swap for onboarding users, which is a marketing spend. Yes, looks nice strategically speaking, but if Mocha actually gets to use their Realm SDK on the Ton ecosystem, that's the important bit for me.
Okay, that takes the conversation into a very interesting direction. I think that's a great point to make. Not something I'd considered immediately, but now that you say that, the Animoca ID, the Mocha ID program managed to get so many signups. So yes, as you say, they're trying to build this reputation layer, make sure that people are doing things via the Mocha ID, make sure everyone has a Mocha ID, and then try to be able to direct those Mocha ID holders to some of their partner protocols, and you can continue to build up your on-chain reputation. Now that you link that to Telegram, I hadn't really considered that, but I guess if you were able to track people's activity now on the Ton blockchain and see what people are up to there, whether there was a component of yeah, I mean, obviously there's a lot of kind of quick and fast gaming going on Ton, but maybe there could be other stuff moving forward. I would love to understand if it was a pure marketing spend of like, look, let's attract people to each other's ecosystems, or is there any data sharing aspect to this?
I think that has to be. I think that has to be. If you think about how a credit score works, right, or any kind of reputation layer, and a credit score ultimately in the real world is that it's how trustable are you to receive a specific loan, and that only works if all institutions, all banks agree on that the credit score agency that does that, for example, in Austria, is doing that in a good way. And you can, if you have that credit score, you can go to every bank and be like, yep, this is my credit score. This is what I would like as a loan. And people would rely on that and say yes or no. And that reputation layer that Mocha is building that goes beyond the loyalty layer, that also only works if it has a very, very broad adoption. And I think that adoption for them can't stop with the ETH ecosystem. It has to go further than that. And I also think that it's also a significant growth vehicle for them, because once you have penetrated a lot of the ETH ecosystem with all the partnerships that you had, and you want to still show some hockey stick growth, you actually have to go to the next biggest ecosystem. And again, if you manage to become the number one reputation layer across blockchains with the Mocha ID, that would be a tremendous win, tremendous long-term goal for Mocha to achieve. And that can't work if they're only staying on one ecosystem. So for that reason, I think that whether that's live or not, but the data sharing aspect is a very important one. Might not be a part of the partnership at this stage, but definitely something that both parties have been like heavily considering on how they want to deal with that.
Yeah, look, just picking out a few more details from the official press release. So it goes into more details here. And usually these Animoca press releases are really good. They just tell you things in plain sight. And because no one reads, they just go unnoticed. I remember when they told people basically in these press releases that there would be a token and, essentially that there would be an airdrop coming, and no one was buying the NFTs at the time when there was like less than an ETH for those Mochaverse NFTs, which went up to like 4 to 5 ETH. They were literally just telling people in the press release. But to your point, there's a few interesting things here where they say Mochaverse and the two blah 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 blah. Mochaverse and the two foundations have committed to explore opportunities to bootstrap consumer growth of the Ton blockchain and Mocha network through the Realm network, Mochaverse's flagship interoperable SDK product, and the Telegram mini app platform. In particular, Mochaverse and Ton Foundation will work towards integrating the Realm Network SDK into the Ton blockchain to serve as the central reputation source and onboard, attest, and query data across different Ton ecosystem apps. Like, so this is Animoca takeover, no? Don't you think? Like, it's a little bit like if Animoca is going to be the central reputation layer for the Ton blockchain. And if you just scroll down, when you're talking about the potential growth that you can, that you're trying to aim for, even when you're doing well, Yat, the co-founder of Animoca Brands and executive chairman, said the unique partnership between Telegram and Ton and the collaboration revealed today provide an opportunity to bring Mocha ID and the Realm network to Telegram's 900 million users, which we believe could exponentially magnify all of our respective networks. I think that is a pretty fair statement. Exponentially magnify with 900 million users. Any final reflections, Legendary? We're coming towards the close of the show today, but I'm glad we took it in that direction because I think that's pretty interesting.
Yeah, whenever we speak about those topics, two things come to my mind. One is the Gitcoin passport, and you remember that from our old days in the airdrop farming Discord in airdrop season, how tedious it was to get a good reputation score that connect with 20 plus pages, and then only just a few protocols even referencing the Gitcoin passport, because most of them came up with their own metrics and were like, I don't care. And the other is, whenever I talk to a game or to a project right now, one of the key pieces of that conversation is always, how do we flag Sybils? That's completely different for a game, completely different for an L2. It's also of different importance, but that is such an important question. And again, if there's going to be a big winner for that question, it's going to be one reputation layer who will just have access to most of the data. And this is clearly a war of who is being able to pool the most data to give you a good answer to the question, who's a trustable user?
Yeah, great Great set of points. I think this is a lot about data right now. We already know how valuable data is in the Web2 world. I cannot imagine how valuable some of this Web3 data will be, but I don't think people have got a strong handle on it at the moment. So interesting to see that develop. We will obviously keep an eye out and continue to report on it as we see fit. But as I just said, that is the end of today's show. Hope you enjoyed it. I think we dealt with some interesting stuff, dealt with the ETH ETF stuff, the Mochaverse stuff, and the integration with Ton blockchain. Hope that was interesting. As always, thank you to my legendary co-host, Legendary. Thank you to the contributors up on stage with us today, Tiro and Funky, and everyone in the YouTube and Twitter comments. As always, we're going to continue to try to pick out more people as and when applicable. Hope you have a wonderful day. Take care. We'll be back again with you same time tomorrow, 7 a.m. Eastern time. We'll be back. Take care and see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.